My name is Jamin Goecker. I'm a realtor in South Central Alaska, and my mission is to help you to build an intentional and significant legacy for yourself and your family by coaching on real estate. And today, what we're going to be talking about are the things that you need to know if you're going to be driving to Alaska along the Alcan Highway. So I get a lot of questions about this, and I've actually interviewed quite a few people who have come up recently on my podcast called the Alaskan Journey Podcast. So that's where a lot of this information is going to be coming from people who have actually done it recently. So this is going to be the boots on the ground perspective. To check out that podcast, the link for that is going to be in the description section down below. But let me go ahead and give you the cliff notes in this video. Before we get started though, you know what to do. Like it and subscribe to it, and let's get going. First thing I would say is the reason that people will drive the Alcan Highway is usually one of three reasons. Number one, it's going to be way cheaper usually to drive the Alcan Highway than it's going to be to ship everything, put everything on the ferry, or for a lot of folks actually downsizing to the point where they can just put everything in checked bags and take it on the plane. So it's going to be cheaper, and that's going to be one of the big reasons that people do move up here or do use the Alcan Highway as their mode of transportation for getting up here. The other reason that people decide to use the Alcan is maybe they weren't able to get scheduling onto the ferry, because that's another thing. It's not like a 24/7, 365 days a year kind of a ferry system. You've got specific times where a couple of ferries are going to be going back and forth on these passages. And if you're not on that booking, then I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait, or you're going to have to drive the Alcan. So that's another big reason a lot of folks will use the Alcan. And the third reason, we kind of talked about this before, but not being able to downsize enough to the point where you can just jump onto a plane and go. So those are going to be the big reasons that people decide to take the Alcan over flying or taking the ferry. Now, one of your biggest hurdles when you are driving the Alcan Highway is going to be getting through customs. So I've heard people who have had terrible experiences, and I've talked with people where, it literally sounded like it was like going through the drive-thru of McDonald's or something. Well, depending on your McDonald's, but it sounded really smooth for them as they were going through. And some of the tips that I got from talking with people who have done it recently is have a written itinerary for where you're going to be at what time. So I know you have in your head an idea for, okay, we're going to go to stop at this town and then this town and then this town. You need to write that out. So when you do stop at the border and they're asking you questions, you can just show them, hey, this is going to be the route that we're going to be going on. Secondly, if you haven't done so already, download the Alcan app. So this is an app that they create where you can actually go upload documents to it and be able to just get all your stuff taken care of ahead of time. So it's not infallible. There are obviously sometimes issues with any app with it crashing, but for the most part, if you can download that app and just get really familiar with it and start uploading a lot of your stuff to it, it's going to make your process a lot easier getting through customs. Make sure, again, as you're going through customs, that you have a letter from your employer saying that you are in fact getting hired up there, that for what you're going up there for, or if you have some kind of a property where you're going to be closing on it in the near future. Maybe you have it under contract. Maybe you need a letter from realtor saying, hey, I am working with these people to get a home up here, or a letter from the landlord that you now have a lease with. Have something like that showing that you have a good reason that involves moving in order to get through. Because at this point, they're really not letting people in just for tourist purposes as of the recording of this video. By the way, for any questions about COVID, their procedures, what's new about that, you're going to have to just go look it up themselves. I gave up a while ago trying to keep up. So go check that out. The other thing I would say, if you have pets, make sure you have the rabies and the shots and some kind of a physical with the pet all done ahead of time. That is going to save you probably some time at the border, just with them seeing that it's already done. They're probably not going to care once they see you've actually done it though. This next one is actually really important because I've heard a lot of people have run into this, and do not bring any sort of weapon with you. I don't care if it is a BB gun, pellet gun, handgun, and your license to carry. Does not matter. Do not bring it. It's going to cost you way more of a headache than it is worth. Okay. For people who are coming in from or coming into Alaska, obviously, usually they're very pro-gun, and nothing wrong with that at all. From my experience, it's going to be a lot easier if you just ship that stuff up, though. So find some kind of a gun store and just ship it to them, and make sure that any ammo, anything like that, preferably you can just ship that over there too, or make sure you're really reading the regulations to understand how much you can bring with you at one time. So make sure you go check that out as well. The next thing I would say for getting through the border, read everything, understand their regulations sometimes better than they do. Okay, if you can quote back to them their regulations for how things are supposed to go, chances are you're going to have a way easier time than somebody that just shows up and essentially is asking for forgiveness. If you're someone who shows up and says, hey, I've got the propane tank back there, I've read your regulations and how you want that transported, it's over, it's this size now, so according to your regulations, we're good to go. So by the time that you can quote that stuff back to them and you know it really well, and you understand that U.S. regulations are probably going to be different than Canadian regulations for how you transport stuff. And once you've actually shown that you know that, you're probably going to have a pretty easy time of it. That's going to be the experience where you're just kind of blowing through and just kind of waving out the back, and everything's just bright sunshine and rainbows. So make sure you've got that all squared away, because it's going to save you a ton of headache and heartache down the road. Let's take a break here real quick. As I already stated, a lot of this information is going to be coming from conversations I've had from people who've recently moved up here to Alaska from my podcast. So obviously, if you haven't listened to the podcast already, do go check that out down below at Alaskan Journey. And if you're wanting a relocation guide, answering a lot of the basic questions people have as they are moving up here, do make sure that you go to my website down below, put relocation guide in the little comment section as you're registering, so I know what to send you. So definitely make sure you take advantage of that, and let's finish today's video. One more thing on customs before we move on. This should go without saying, but do not get into a pissing match where you are arguing with the person at the customs. They are not there to throw the red carpet out there and make it warm and welcoming for everybody. Their job is to screen people out who can't follow the rules. Or that's the best way to put it. They're there to screen people out who can't follow the rules. So don't get into an argument with them, and just be very respectful. Make sure you understand the regulations better than they do, and the chances are it's going to be a much easier time than if you go out there and you're just trying to get into a big pissing match with them, because that's not going to end very well at all for you, my friend. The next thing, moving on, getting into more specific actual driving through Canada tips. So the first thing I would say is make sure you have at least 2, preferably 3 forms of navigation. Most of the satellites that you use for your iPhone probably not going to work as well in Canada as they do in other places. So if you have some kind of a sat phone, if you have some kind of a paper atlas, those are going to be worth solid gold when you are out there. The next thing I would say, make sure you bring extra gallons of gas, and make sure that you bring at least 2 spare tires as you're going. You heard that right, 2 spare tires, because I always take it for granted at least one of my tires are going to bust while I'm out there. So the second one is the actual spare. So make sure that you go ahead and do that, because if you have to repair any tires out there, you can pick up a nail or something like that. It's usually going to be about $60 to $90 to do that. And by the way, everything's going to be more expensive as you're driving the Alcan. If you go into the ditch in the snow in the wintertime, they have to pull you out. That's usually going to be a cost somewhere between like $600 to $800 for them to get you out of there. So just know things are going to be more expensive as you're going along out there. The other thing I would mention, as you are trying to figure out your lodging, understand where you're going to be going, but chances of you being able to actually book something ahead of time might not be great, but you also don't want to be showing up and trying to check in like 7 or 8 o'clock at night. So call ahead that day and say, hey, I'm just verifying, number one, you guys are open, because a lot of those websites are not necessarily updated. You might get there and find out they've been under renovation for 4 months and their website didn't indicate it. So make sure you call ahead, and yeah, they are still there. And yes, they are going to have a spot for us. If you can call ahead before then, great. But the fact of the matter is you're probably going to want that flexibility in your schedule to not have to full on commit to being somewhere at a specific time every single day, because, things happen along the way. You're not going to be taking any tourist pit stops, but it's going to be putting a lot of stress on your trailer and the entire rig driving the Alcan, and you just don't know what's going to happen. So give yourself a little bit of flexibility as you're moving along there. Kind of talking about planning ahead a little bit too. Make sure with the gas that you're looking for some kind of a new gas stop whenever you get to about a half a tank, because just because a gas station is on the map does not mean that it's actually open. Some of them are seasonal, some of them come and go just because their business went out and they haven't updated it yet. So don't put yourself into a position where you have to find a property or you're in big trouble, or you don't have to find a gas station or you're in big trouble. Let's try to avoid that by making sure that you're, about half tank. Okay, now we need to start looking for a place. Let's at least have that on our radar. So that's really big. Cannot emphasize that enough. And make sure you've got those spare cans of gas in the back as kind of a worst case scenario. All right, well, those are my tips that I have for people who are going to be moving through Canada. Again, you want to hear the more in-depth analysis and kind of the stories behind all these tips, do make sure you go check out the podcast episodes. Link for those are going to be in the description section down below. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.